Boom. Let's go. So I'm gonna be doing blending modes today, and we got the nice mic set up today. I don't know if that's. I think that's out of frame. Hang on, let me start screen recording. I'm gonna be taking 3 different things: a gradient, a texture, and a background that's kind of black and white, and will work well for this. But I'm gonna try to explain all the blending modes in quick. So I'm gonna grab these. You know what, first let's open a new file in Photoshop, default size, doesn't matter. Texture, and this thing. Gonna pop that in there. Got those 3 things. Alright, so first let's just get dissolve out of the way, because there's normal and there's dissolve, which doesn't look like it changes anything except until you lower the opacity. And then dissolve lowers the opacity by taking out pixels, basically one by one. Not one by one, but like it creates like a grain instead of transparent looking. So that's dissolve. Let's go back to 100%, and I'm gonna go to darken, which takes out the whites. So it leaves your darks. So your darken leaves the dark parts. Okay, and then we go to multiply, which is basically the same thing, but it's basically the same thing. So these groups here are all similar. So the darken and multiply section takes away the lights in your highlights and things for the most part, and then the next one takes out your blacks. I'll get to those in a second. So darken and multiply are basically the same thing. Multiply is a little bit more intense, I guess you could say, and the same thing with lighten and screen. You really have to just play with it and get to know all of them. Then color burn lets the underlying colors shine through a little bit. So like in these areas that would be gray, it's letting these purples be instead of just like a darker or lighter black. That's what color burn does. Same thing with color dodge in the other direction with just showing your whites. Linear burn is very, very, very similar to darken and multiply. It's just really just case. These sections as wholes really just are, you look at the section and then just pick which fits best for your section. So I'm darken color just is very sharp instead of letting all that like middle. It just kind of is more sharply defined. Moving on to the screen and lighten section, takes out all your blacks and just leaves the white parts. So lighten is, it gives you, it's a little bit of a hard edge, not really. Screen is pretty soft edge. I use screen the most out of any blending mode probably. Color dodge is like color burn from before, except with your whites. Linear dodge add is somewhere between color dodge and screen, somewhere in the middle there. Lets the color shine through a little bit, but not too much. And then lighten color is like darker in color. Overlay, and the overlay section does a little bit of both. So it focuses on grays rather than highlights or shadows. It focuses on your midtones. That's overlay. Soft light, which is more of a subtle effect. Overlay is very harsh and contrasty. Soft light is like a very softened version of that. Hard light is probably one of the most dramatic blending modes. It just barely lets a little bit of color through, just through the midtones. So these areas that are just grays in this image, those are the only places that the color can get through at all. Vivid light is very close to that, except leaning more towards overlay, letting more colors through. Linear light basically does nothing for this image specifically anyway. This image is blacks and whites with very, very few grays. Hard light, vivid light, linear light, these 3 specifically, and well, a lot of this section honestly just don't really do much for this image specifically, because it's just very black and white. There's not a lot of midtones for it to play with, so that's what the next thing will be. Pin light, also very similar. Hard mix is very interesting because you need it only lets past a certain brightness and below a certain brightness through. It's a very specific thing. There's a lot of tutorials online. There's one I'm going to link below that plays with hard mix to create a very cool digital monitor effect. And hard mix is very seldomly used, except in like very harsh digital cases most of the time. And then difference is this. So it is an inversion basically. So technically you could just do a white rectangle over your whole image, set it to difference, and it would just be an invert if you don't want to use the invert filter for some reason. It's basically just an invert, and so is exclusion, except exclusion is a little bit more soft. You don't see as many of those shadows. I don't really know how else to describe that. Just the dark parts of your image, it feels more transparent, like screen, like multiply, like these other blending modes, and soft light, I suppose, but that's more neutral. And then subtract. I really don't see a use case for subtract, really, because it does the same thing. It really serves the same purpose as multiply or screen, except it also inverts. So it's just faster, I guess, than inverting and then applying a blending mode. It's just a shortcut, basically. There's no really other reason for it. It just does the same things as other things, but I don't use it ever. So that's just me, though. And divide, same thing. Inverts and also makes the other part transparent. So subtract and divide basically do the same things. And then hue, it just makes it black and white. That's really all it does. Most of the time, it varies, and I'm not sure why. I really need to look deeper into this, but most of the time, hue just makes it black and white if you're using a black and white image. And then if you're not using a black and white image, if it has color, man, the AC just turned on. It's fine. The hue makes it black and white if you're using a black and white image. If not, the hue of your new image affects the hue of your old image in varying results. Saturation, basically the same thing. We're playing with black and white over a colored image, so it makes it grayscale. Color, basically the same thing, unless you're playing, once again, with two colored images. And then luminosity is very similar to hard mix or vivid light or these things, but it just kind of, it's like a threshold effect almost, and it just like blows out your highlights and really deepens your shadows. So that's basically it for this one.